Now, Chautauqua, I want to just visit a little bit about Chautauqua, but it was a marvelous place. My grandparents had a cottage, I mean a small cottage out there. Well, it wasn't so small. It was a room probably about 15 by 15, and we had 4 bedrooms. They had a wire this way and a wire that way. They pulled 2 curtains and we had 4 bedrooms. But they had out there, just talking around, a huge rotunda. The auditorium was the name of that place. Huge circular roof. And it was always decorated during Chautauqua season with bunting and flags and so forth. There was a gentleman named Eugene Shear. He took that as his personal business to decorate the auditorium. And that man was in his 70s at the time, and he was up there crawling around all his girders and so forth. He was a very nice man. Shear's a repair shop right down next to the fire station in Lincoln. And so I did say I wouldn't eat what he wore. I misspoke. If I liked it. Yeah, or a beer. No, seriously, the Chautauqua thing was a marvelous thing for this community. It was Ella Brainerd, I believe, was the lady who had the land at that land. They called it Brainerd's Park. And there was a miscellaneous group of houses out there and cottages that were unique. And many times later on when Chautauqua closed, oh, they had such speakers as, thank you very, very much. Is there a deposit on that? They had such speakers as Billy Sunday and other of that ilk that would appear. And then also, speaking of Chautauqua, reminds me that was a forerunner of Lincoln Community Theater. They had theaters as a huge stage, and it was well lighted and so forth. And the locals put on their own plays and productions, and it was very interesting, and it was very successful. The seats stood around so that the guy in the back could see what's going on down in front. They were steep that much, and it worked out very, very well. They had a concession stand at the opening place, and I can remember today that a little fellow who took tickets to go into Chautauqua Grounds. Now, why do I remember his name? I can't remember Richard Martin's name. But what is the name again, please? The fellow's name was Larkin Knoll. Now, that ring of anybody here? Oh, shucks. I've been here too long. Anyway, why would I remember names like that? I have no idea. The other day I had to talk to the Veterans Administration fellow here in town about my records and so forth. And he wanted to know my serial number, my armor serial number, and my social security number. My galvan came up with them. Now, what's your phone number, Ron? But God is good to us in certain ways. Some of us have decent memories, and some of us. But I have found that I can't find my way back home sometimes, so it's not that good. In any event, Chautauqua was a big thing for this community. And it included not only the folks that live here in town, but many of our rural, our farmers in here. There was just any amount of huge numbers of people that showed up the Chautauqua season. One of the things that I found in my bicycle tours around was the auctions at the courthouse. They would cry out an auction on the north side and north side of the courthouse, not northwest, north side of the courthouse. And I like to stand there and watch them, look at the people as they were bidding and trying to pick up nuances and so on. I couldn't spell nuance in those days, so I don't know what I mean by that. In any event, I remember one very, very vivid incident that stands out in my mind. I was watching the auctioneer cry this farm sale, and there was a lady standing over the side, and she was sobbing. Not crying, she was sobbing. And I realized then, now I was a kid, 10, 12 years old. I realized that lady was watching her property go. And I don't have any idea what was going on, except that she was hurt. And so I quit going to those sales. That wasn't much fun to watch. Sales that we used to have was livestock sales. That was known as Bannister and Logan. Now that's where the Logan County Bank is, over on the catty corner from Fricky's. That was an implement store, and also they sold Alice Chalmers tractors. And they'd have every Saturday, they'd have livestock sales. And that was a big thing for a kid. I'd sit on the fence and watch it. I used to watch it, watching everything with Colonel Wolford. And he was a dandy. He was really a professional. He knew what the heck he was doing. But that's a part of the community. The auctioneer could make or break a sale like that. So that's went on there. I wanted to go back to Lincoln Casket Company. Anybody remember they had a casket company here in Lincoln?
Uriah Hill owned it.
Yeah, Bill Ward and the Dollars family had that. And then that became Lincoln Store Fixtures, and that became Myers Industries. And it was a very important part of our community. Oh yes, we also had the ice house. Anybody remember that we didn't always have a refrigerator? We had an ice box, and you could order 25 pounds or 50 pounds or 10 pounds. So I struck them by your house, and you had a sign in the window showing how many pounds you wanted. You go back to his truck and chip out what it is, haul it up, put it in your ice box, and also dump the pan that took care of the building of the ice. So that was an important thing. We also had an outlet for the ice box, or for the ice company, right down here, a block up from Logan Street, yes, between Sangamon and Logan. And they had an ice house there. You could drive up there and put 25 pounds in the trunk of your car and drive away. And we usually had a college kid or two that ran for them. And we used to watch that all the time. We had a very interesting thing as far as the police department was concerned in those days. I'm rambling, and I'm sorry about that, but it's pretty hard to put memories in an order. Our police department we had a good police department. This was before the days of two-way radio and so forth. And we had what we called a merchant policeman. His job was to go door to door and rattle the doors, and if they were firm, that was fine. And if they weren't, then he had to do something about that. But his radio was a light above Malloy's restaurant there, just down a block. And if he saw the light on, that meant he was supposed to call somewhere. And that's how the alarm was set. Malloy's restaurant, by the way, was a very, very, I think they threw the key away when they built that place because it was 24/7. And it's a good spot to eat. And very handy for old Bill when he was in 114 South Chicago Street. I want to move it forward a little bit so we can get out of Lincoln and go to the country. How many people, there's a lot of people here that remember Mark Hollins attacking his hometown. Mark Hollins was an Air Force pilot, and he flew a C-47, what's known as a DC-3, down the middle of Broadway with his things below the deck, the top of the courthouse. And you can imagine what the reverberation of the sound was as he went by the high school. I was in the military at the time, and my mother wrote me and told me about that story. And the interesting thing about that is, and that's why the You have a picture of it here in the genealogical office. Mark worked for a photographer named Charles Stringer, and he advised Charles that he was going to come to Lincoln at such and such a time and such an hour. And Charlie Stringer went up on the roof of his building where he had his studio and set this camera up. And that's why you have the very picture that you have in here, Charlie. When he came roaring down with his wings tipped this way so he'd get below the courthouse domes, running down Broadway. And there's a story about that. There were several versions of what happened to him as a result of that episode. He was a brand new pilot and celebrating a little bit. And seriously, he probably should have been court-martialed. But the story is that his commanding officer said to him, "I understand your trip home was very successful." which was really inappropriate. Mark was I flew with Mark during the military. Strictly by accident. We found that we were close to one another when I was in Oregon Field, and I went over to Villa Kudway where that was his air base, and flew to first in Fellbrook, Germany with him in the C-47. And I was tickled to death to do that. And speaking of flying, the first airplane ride this old man had was what was known as a Ford trimotor. Does anybody know what a Ford trimotor was? Obviously, trimotor with three motors, but it was corrugated fuselage and about a place for the four seats. And that landed out here west of town, just right across the street, the highway from the Oakland County Fairgrounds. And I found out it was out there, and I ride out my bicycle. And well, I was pretty interested in that. So I conned the guy into taking me up for $5. I didn't have $5. I had to get on my bicycle, ride home, and get my paper money to get $5 to go to the port. And my mother was mortified when she found that out. She was not only mortified, she was very angry with her son. But anyway, that was my first airplane ride in a Ford trimotor. And my own money, I delivered the pantograph early in the morning. And I think we had to meet the train at something like 6:15 in the morning, right across the street over here. And we take the newspapers off, take them into the depot, fold them, put them on our bags on our bicycle, and take off and run our respective routes. Mine was in North Lincoln, not an area known for paying their bills. And Saturday was collection day. I would go out and collect, and the story was simply this verbatim: "I'm a little short today, Billy. Can I catch you next week?" Well, that'll be all right. Next week became next week, became next week. And finally I had to deliver newspapers to them. Well, then they called the courier. That was much fun, in any event. My mother complained to my father. Well, she didn't complain to him. She commented to him about Billy working hard. And with his background, he kind of reared up a little bit and said, "Ed, hard work never hurt anybody." That was his dictum. That's the way things worked in my house. Hard work would never hurt anybody. And he was right. I wanted to comment a little bit about something that happened downtown in Lincoln. We had a murder on the north side of the square in a building called Spurgeon's. A young lady found herself in a family way, as they say, quaint expression as that is, and it was being taken care of by an abortion in that building. That was a sad thing. It ended up in the lady losing her life. And a murder charge, I don't know, you'll have to get into Courier records on that, certainly, but I know it was talk of the town, as they say. Jim, do you remember anything
The
about that?
charges were filed against the manager of the store, who apparently had impregnated her
Oh my goodness.
when she was working there, and tried to do the abortions himself in a very crude way, and that caused her death.
Oh, an ugly event for the county. By the way, there's a gentleman for whom I have great respect. I call him the icon of Sangamon Street. Jim grew up in an apartment above Sangamon Street, a very modest situation, but he became the king of Hickey's Pool Hall. And that's a great part of the history of Lincoln. The king of Hickey's Pool Hall is now an appellate judge. And so I'm very, very proud of him, very fond of him. And the guy writes, my goodness, he writes well. I hope Tom Harris writes as well as Jim Hickey, because he does. And I'm sure he does. But I'd love to see some of their, in any event. I wanted to go back to Chautauqua. And at the time of the demise of early demise of Chautauqua, some of those cottages out there started appearing at Lincoln Lakes. And Lincoln Lakes rented the ground for a building site at a ridiculously low price. I have no idea what it was now. But so my father got my grandfather's permission to move that cottage from Chautauqua to Lincoln Lakes. And that was really a wonderful event in our family. That was our summer residence. My dad remodeled that thing, and he made a lovely cottage out of it. And the way we three kids slept was in a very confined place above the front porch, the screened area. And if you set up too fast in bed at night, you're going to knock yourself out because it was that tight. And we had to crawl up a ladder and go in there and spread out. And the Lincoln Lakes was a marvelous thing for this community. We had people commute from around the community to come in and go to Lincoln Lakes. And they had a very simple system. The ladies on one side, the boys on the other side. And when you change clothing into your swimming suit, they just gave you a simple basket. And you took the basket back, put it up, they gave you a number. And that took care of that. And it was a huge beach. And if you were on top of things and had a little foot spot behind you, you'd go to the lake management in the early spring and ask to work for them. And you would shovel sand and pull weeds and whatever else, paint, whatever else they told you to do. And at the end of your working period, they handed you a pass for the summer. Mm-hmm. So it was a really neat thing for us. My dad was not about to buy me a pass. He thought I would work for it, and I did, and it worked out very well that way. I wanted to make sure that I've got about 3 hours notes here. I want to talk now about the Golden County Fair. It's a part of that's so we're going to morph into the county that way. The Golden County Fair was reestablished in 1937. And it was a real nice thing for this community. The first fair queen came from Beekson, Illinois, and her name was Edna Beeler, B-U-E-H-L-E-R. And later on, Edna's folks lived right across the street from Gene and I on Peoria Street. And my kids found out that Mrs. Beeler was some cookie cook. And they bothered her to death running across the street to get cookies from Mrs. Beeler. God love her, she was as gracious as that could be. But the fairgrounds was a real big community thing. Economically, it was a good part of the community. We had people come from far and wide. And two big things about the Golden County Fair is in the afternoon they had harness racing. Mm-hmm. Now that's what they have what they call pacers and trotters. And in the evening they had the society horse show, if you please. The society horse show. You dressed up. And I mean, the jacket, the tie. Well, my dad just loved that because people went out there and got dirty, and it said it helped him with his drinking. But you have boxes, and some people have boxes down in front rows, and those ones down in the front row on the afternoon of the races, they got dirty. They got really dirty. But the evening, the horse show now, and they had the Logan County band, and I believe it was the American Legion. I'm certain of that. And they were in a circular park down in the middle of the fair track, and they told them F.I. Crum, Rummy Crum. He was a moderator of the announcer for the show, and he knew what he was talking about, and didn't have no trouble at all. He stood in the middle of the ring where the band was, and these ladies and gentlemen bring their horses in. I remember there was a lady, Mrs. A.C. Thompson, who had a restaurant in Chicago, Illinois, and she had Hackney ponies. And it was always much fun to watch those Hackney ponies with the gait that they had. And I got the job out there of selling programs, much high school kids, Tom Harris included, and we sold afternoon programs for the afternoon races, and then we'd have the same program, a different program for that evening for the horse show. Well, I found out the first year that they all asked for pencils. They wanted to mark their scorecards. We didn't have any pencils. Well, the next morning I went to Kresge's, the dime store, and I bought some pencils for a few cents a piece and sold them for 10 cents a piece. So that was the beginning of my entrepreneurship. But it worked. And Wilbur Lehman, and Jack Bushel, and Wilbur Coburn. Wilbur Coburn had part of it, and Wilbur Lehman had part of it. And they were always at loggerheads about what was best for the fair. Jack Bushel was in charge of concessions later on. I love it. He was a great man. And he used to stand back and watch the two Colberts and the two Wilburs go at it. They could never agree on what was going to be done that particular day. So the way they got their entertainment for the Logan County Fair was they go to a national convention in Las Vegas, and they would look at various possibilities for entertainment and book them if they could afford it. They had a budget enough that would allow it, and they had some very good acts, and they had some doctors. But one of the big acts we had out there was a fellow named David Merrifield, who did a trapeze act beneath an airplane. And he had this airplane, or trapeze, started on it and back and forth in front of the grandstand, and he's doing his various trapeze act without a net or a rope. He just did it. And so one year, his pilot had a birthday that Saturday night, and I found out about it and talked to my wife, and we had a little party for Dave's pilot. It was a helicopter pilot. And so the next morning, the pilot took me out for a ride around Logan County. That was my first helicopter ride. It was a bubble chopper where you sit right up front and watch everything. And he took me all around, took her out over Burton View and so forth, and back over Beeston, all around the county. We have two roots in my family. Beeston was my father's, and Burton View was my mother's. And so we have, and I was always proud of this, so I used to tell my brother we've got some real roots around there. So my father decided it would be a good thing for his son to learn about farm work.
Oh, God.
And so he would farm me out. In other words, my grandmother and grandfather came and cooked me up, and I was packed, and I stayed for the summer.